What's up, y'all? It's Shuffle, and today we're talking about Bloodmoon. So we're going to move away from the character guides for a video, just because the creative urge struck me to do this, which is why I'm doing it now. I typed up a lovely 2-page thing to talk about, so hopefully it doesn't take more than an hour, but I always ramble. So if you're unaware, Bloodmoon is the hard mode of the game. You can say Torchless is harder because it is, but Torchless is also a self-imposed difficulty. It's just like, yeah, if you want to take the risk, here it is. Otherwise, I consider Bloodmoon probably the hard mode, like the fair way to consider a hard mode. You know, I think Torchless is its own special case, so that's that. Bloodmoon and Stygian are interchangeable in terms of terminology. The only difference is Bloodmoon has Crimson Court installed, so you get 4 more deaths allowed and a few extra weeks to finish the game because they just consider the Crimson Court to be a little more threatening, and then also make it so your game takes longer to finish. With that said, this is a spoiler warning. This guide will have spoilers, and usually when I make stuff, I try to include the new players in the discussion, and I'm not trying to gatekeep them from this. I'm just giving everyone a warning so they're not blindsided when they stumble into this video by accident, either through the autoplay algorithm or some such thing. So the reason there is spoiler content is because I'm going to be talking about the end of the game, I'm going to be talking about what's in the end of the game, I'm going to be talking about how to complete this mode, and if you don't care about spoilers, so if you have already seen the end of the game, you've watched like your favorite streamer play it or something like that, or you just simply don't care and you're just looking for advice, everything I tell you in this video will apply to Darkest and Radiant, because Darkest Dungeon is one of those types of games where if it works in the hard difficulty, it will trickle down to the other difficulties and still be applicable. Which means I'm assuming that if you are watching this video, you have tried Bloodmoon, or you want to try Bloodmoon, and you're just not sure how to go about it, or you just don't want to try and fail a few times, because that's actually very normal with not just Darkest Dungeon, but Bloodmoon specifically. And I'm also thinking that most of you watching have probably finished the game, or made it a good way through the game. Okay, let's talk about the changes you're going to see in Stygian/Bloodmoon. So to start, the enemies have increased hit points, they do increase stress damage, the hero cost, or the gold cost for upgrading heroes is doubled, which I actually forgot about, so it's a good thing I read this. The light meter burns faster, and unlike regular Darkest Dungeon, you can actually lose in this game mode. So the cool part about regular Darkest Dungeon is every single week, you are always given an apprentice quest, like a green short apprentice quest. It doesn't matter what week you're on. It doesn't matter if your entire roster is level 6. You're always given somewhere that you can start over in case something happens. Which means that having a way to actually lose the game is pretty crazy. The first way to lose in Bloodmoon is if you have 16 heroes die. This also includes the 2 heroes you can potentially lose in the final fight if you do not have some kind of way to deal 300 damage to the Heart of Darkness, or if you don't bring a party that only has 2 heroes in it to avoid the come unto your makers. The other way you can lose in Bloodmoon is if you take over 99 weeks to finish the game. This means you cannot spend 300 weeks sitting there leveling heroes, purging every single negative quirk, consolidating all the power you can, and then just trying to steamroll the end of the game that way. So you have to finish the game rather quickly. It seems kind of daunting at first, but once you're focused on finishing the game instead of just playing it to have fun, or like you're always trying to have fun, right? But instead of focusing on let me just explore around, let me wait for cool trinkets, that kind of stuff, if you start approaching the game with every single week in the game and you have the mindset of I need to finish this as quickly and efficiently as possible, the time limit is not insurmountable. Usually, I would say you're probably going to finish it in around week 60, maybe 70, depending on what you're accomplishing and what you're skipping or whatever. To speak specifically about the changes, the increased hit points means that enemies are usually sticking around for 1 or 2 extra turns each fight, and that can actually have some pretty detrimental incremental effects. So a couple adjectives, I guess, right there, if those qualify as adjectives. It means that stress casters that you can normally like potentially 1-tap are reliably like 2-tapped or 3-tapped unless you have crit or something like that happen. So that means that they're getting off an extra shot of stress. It means that the damage enemies are getting off extra turns of damage or extra turns of guards and blocks and stuff like that. And this means that your control or your ability to do damage with your teams becomes more relevant, because if you're taking like 6 or 7 turns per hallway fight and you're not just trying to stall, you're going to start falling behind in terms of stress and damage, especially on longer missions. The flat crit increase, which I think I forgot to mention in the overview, is very threatening. So the extra 3% is noticeable. You will feel that enemies crit you much more frequently, even though it's only 3%. As we all know, in Darkest Dungeon, crits are very strong and very terrifying. With gold cost being doubled to upgrade heroes, that means that gold is even more important than it was. So you always have to be focusing on trying to keep up good amounts of gold and finding the best times to upgrade your heroes. It also means that the discounts in the upgrade facilities, and I guess the treatments and stuff like that too, the upgrades are even more relevant, because if you have double cost, that means that any discount bonus that you get by upgrading your facilities is effectively doubled. So for instance, if it costs like 100 gold to upgrade someone and you have a 10% discount, it goes down to 90 gold, right? And then if that cost is doubled, it goes from 100 to 200 gold, but then also that same 10% discount saves you 20 gold instead of 10. The light meter burning faster may feel kind of non-existent at first, but it honestly does matter quite a bit. Just the fact it takes off 1 extra point per tile that you walk, so instead of losing 6 light, you lose 7. It means that on average in a dungeon, you have to take 1 extra torch than you're normally used to. But sometimes, if you're including how enemies lower torch by hitting you with certain things, like the occultist girl with the stress blast, for instance, you should be planning to take maybe 2 or 3 extra torches per dungeon. And then if you want to manipulate light levels to get extra loot, you should be taking even more than that. So the torch stuff is relevant, if not obvious at first. When you consider all of these changes together, you have to look at the loss conditions for the game mode, and you have to ask yourself which one is more threatening to you as a player. And I'm not saying these things to put anyone down. I'm making this guide to help everyone, but you have to understand where you're weak to understand how to fix it. So if you look at the loss condition of 16 deaths, and you're saying, I can only lose 16 people, and if I account for the end of the game, the final fight, where I automatically lose 2 people unless I can do something like take 2 heroes or blow up the boss, then it means the way you build teams and the way you fight battles is weak. Or like, it's not good enough for what you have to get through. So if you find yourself losing a lot of heroes, then start considering how you can build better teams or the way you can more efficiently take down enemies. If you think that the time limit is the hardest thing to deal with, it means that you are not aggressive enough in how you're trying to get through the game, and it means you're playing probably way too safe. Like, you're only taking short missions, you're only taking like your best heroes, and you need, obviously, 16 good heroes minimum to finish the game. So if you find yourself in either of those camps, then I guess pay attention to the relevant parts, because we're going to cover both of these conditions and the best way to get through them. For this section of the video, the background is going to be a Bloodmoon file that I have that has not finished Bloodmoon, but it is near the end. Let's see actually what week it's in. I think it's like 80? 85? Yeah. So this one's kind of near the end, so you can see it in progress, and hopefully that better explains things. What we're going to talk about next is town management, because you need a strong Hamlet, and you have to be efficient in what you're doing in order to get the most out of stuff and set yourself up for success. As always, you need a good foundation to do anything in life. We're going to talk about the stagecoach first. I messed up the take, so you didn't get to see the mouse scrolling over. The stagecoach is very important. Obviously, it's how you get heroes. It's probably the most impactful thing you can do is choosing good heroes, or the heroes that you want to start with, and building them up correctly. You want to minimize their downfalls and maximize their benefits. The other important part about the stagecoach is it sets you up for pretty much the entire game, but it is most important, as in it is the most important facility, so every building that you have in the hamlet, right, it's a facility, is the most important facility you have for probably the first like 20 weeks of the game. And then going forward, it's obviously important, but it is most impactful at the start, because you're going to recruit a set number of heroes, and then you're going to go from there and build them up. So it needs to not only be kind to you, you also have to get the most out of it in that short amount of time. I messed up yet another take, but let's see. When you're upgrading the stagecoach, I want to say that you don't need more than 4 per week. On this file, I did it with 3, but I think 4 is the maximum you want to go to. The reason you don't want to pour too many upgrades into the stagecoach is because they take deeds, and you need deeds for the blacksmith. The blacksmith is way, way important. It's probably the most important building, or the second most important building behind the guild hall. So you want to put all those resources in there, and you don't want to spend a lot of time upgrading the stagecoach. So I think being able to see 3 or 4 heroes a week, 4 if you really want to be comfortable, right? You can see here it doesn't take a big upgrade, it's just 8 deeds and 10 crests. But being able to see 4 heroes a week should let you fill out the roster as long as you are patient. So that's just the key factor of it, is you have to go, okay, I want, like another highwayman soon, and you want to maximize that chance, but you also have to be patient about it. Sometimes you just get, a couple crap rolls of the stagecoach. And honestly, if you don't have enough good heroes that you want by week 10 or 15, just start over. You could play it out and just be patient, which is completely fine. You can do well and succeed that way, but if you really don't like how your first, 10 to 15 weeks went, start over. There's no shame in it, right? There's no penalty besides you just wasted a couple hours. I shouldn't even say wasted, right? You learned stuff in that time, but yeah. So I'm starting to sidetrack and digress. Otherwise, you don't want to see more than 4 heroes a week. I think otherwise you're spending too many resources that could be going to the blacksmith instead. The hero barracks, I would say upgrade as needed. You don't need the full 29 set of heroes to beat the game. You technically only need 16, probably less than that. You could beat it with 14 heroes, but obviously you want to have a couple extra of each class, or sometimes you just like having extra heroes for certain roles, or someone may actually die. I'm not saying you need to beat this without dying. So upgrading the barracks, I would say as needed, because the heirloom costs do start to creep up. When I say as needed for this upgrade, I mean like you find yourself at the point where you go, okay, I'm planning to tackle this boss soon, or you're at week 40 and you're saying, I need to start getting ready for the darkest dungeon, and so you need to get a couple extra heroes and then train them up. You might be missing something or what have you. Definitely do not upgrade the roster size if you need upgrades from the blacksmith. Make sure you are completely comfortable with where your blacksmith is at before you start upgrading the roster size. Though I will say, in terms of the stagecoach, getting 3 or 4 heroes early per week, so the first upgrade, the network, and then getting the barracks to like maybe 2 upgrades will get you through like half the game. You should be comfortable with like 21 heroes and seeing 4 heroes a week for pretty much the entire game, honestly. But if you want more than that, then go for it. Experienced recruits, do not get them. Just don't. It's not even worth it. Like, it's not worth the resource investment. The busts are probably the weakest heirloom in this guide, like the way I'm going to be constructing it. Even with that, you can trade busts for other heirlooms that you need, and then you can't really afford the crest cost. So the reason experienced recruits was put in the game was to reduce grinding if you lose heroes, right? It was designed with the idea that you're losing level 6 heroes in mind. In this mode, you are ideally only losing level 6 heroes at the end of the game. So you're not trying to get a level 3 hero and then build them back up. There's also a lot of variance with the experienced recruits. It gets better when the network is fully maxed out because you get more roles for heroes. And then with those roles, you also need to get the class that you want. They also have to be like a high enough level, right? You have to roll a level 2 or 3 hero to make it really worth it. Ideally a level 3 hero. And then also that hero has to come with the quirks that are just not completely garbage. As a whole, experienced recruits does not honestly gain you that much. If someone has a different experience, you are obviously free to share it. You can drop in the comments and say that it was actually the upgrade that got you through the entire game. I don't know, but for me, I think it is just worthless in Bloodmoon because the time limit doesn't really... Well, the time limit and the death limit doesn't really allow you the opportunity to lose heroes and then build them back up. You know, you can lose heroes kind of early, not the end of the world, or you start over. And then if you're losing heroes after that, you want to be losing heroes at the end of Crimson Court, and you want to be losing heroes in the Darkest Dungeon. Those are the only places you can really afford to lose heroes, because anyone you lose in the Darkest Dungeon was already not coming back. So if you lose a hero there, but then finish it, it's the same as if they had they'd completed the mission and gotten the never again debuff thing or condition or whatever you want to call it. Next up, we're going to talk about stress relief activities. So when I say that, there are 3 things to consider for stress relief. The first is the tavern. The second, clicked really hard for some reason, is the Abbey. And the third is actually the Puppet Theater district. So which ones do we focus on? I personally focus the most on the Abbey. The reason being the Abbey has less downsides. It still has downsides, but I routinely have people that go to the tavern that just disappear for a couple weeks when drinking or, you know, in the brothel. But then also the Abbey has the penance hall, and if you plan to use the flagellant, you need the penance hall. This is the only thing he can use. You could take him to battles and try and keep lowering his stress through a jester and stuff like that, but I think the Abbey is the safest bet. It is the least costly bet, and it applies the best to the entire roster. It includes the flagellant, whereas the other ones don't consider him. The reason I do not suggest the Puppet Theater also is because the resource cost is pretty steep. You're only going to be able to build a few districts in a Bloodmoon playthrough. You're just not going to have the time to gather the resources, and 200 crests is a very deep investment. It is very powerful. The Puppet Theater is a very good stress relief activity. You can just leave someone on the sidelines for a couple weeks and then they're good to go. It also applies to your entire roster. It saves you a lot of money if you try and maximize its effect. So if you rotate your heroes to make sure that people who have a lot of stress sit out for a couple weeks, it does save you the most money. Like the Puppet Theater could save you tens of thousands of gold, probably like 100,000 gold. I don't even know. I'm just throwing out giant estimated numbers. It's just those 200 crests are really hard to ask. Then you have to ask yourself, if you get the Puppet Theater, what are you trading off instead, you know? Next up, the Sanitarium. Dramatic zoom in. So for the upgrades here, if you can afford to get all of the treatment ward maxed out, definitely go for it. This costs busts, which is, or for this setup that we're doing, where we ignore the tavern and we ignore experienced recruits, that means all of the busts that you get can go to the Sanitarium. So this is just another reason to follow the other things that I've been talking about. I think the treatment library is paramount to get as much as you can maxed out of it. And then patient cells, you can stop at 2 for each. That's usually good enough. You don't need all 3. And actually medical devices, this is something I didn't consider until recently because more and more experience and the additional disease of gray rot being potentially upside instead of downside means that you don't want to go past rank 1 on medical devices. Just get your cheap treatment costs by a little bit, and then if you need to get other diseases off or something like that, then you can bring a grave robber or a plague doctor or something else that can cure disease on missions and just do it that way and save some gold. Otherwise, the reason we don't want to cure extra diseases is because sometimes we want to keep rabies and gray rot on our heroes. For some reason, whenever someone goes in there with syphilis and, I don't know, the AUG or something like that, some other disease where I want to get both of them off, the medical ward decides not to give it to me. But when I'm sitting there going, you know what, I want to protect this gray rot, but I really need to get rid of this red plague, it takes my gray rot anyway. So I actually advise against getting the extra disease cure chance. The treatment library, this is very important, or the treatment ward I should say. This is something I see a lot of newer players do, and I just fundamentally disagree with it. But you do not need to purge every single negative quirk from all of your heroes to succeed. It's actually part of the quirk game, so to speak, to have bad quirks that do not affect the hero at all and leave them on there to block other bad quirks, especially if they can lock in. For instance, an Arbalest is purely range damage, right? So if you get Torn Rotator, which is a quirk that lowers melee damage, you do not care. It doesn't matter if that stays on your Arbalest, ever. It can sit there. In fact, you almost want it to land on her because you want it to lock in so you can block other quirks from showing up. So you don't need to constantly purge everything to win the game. I actually think that's a waste of money in most cases, and gold is very important. So if you need more info on quirks, I did make a quirk guide. I will plug the relevant videos that I've made over time as we, I guess, encounter them or find the opportunity to discuss them. Next up is the Nomad Wagon. Click in here. Nomad Wagon, completely worthless. Do not spend anything on it. The reason being, the trinkets cost way too much, and it takes a lot of crests to upgrade it to a efficient level, and you can be spending those on the Blacksmith and the Guild Hall. So just do not touch the Nomad Wagon. It's very rare that you will ever hit a point where you have enough gold that you can just burn it and not care. And you should be prioritizing missions that give you the trinkets you want anyway. So that means that the Nomad Wagon just serves no purpose in this playthrough. Next, we're going to talk about the Survivalist. This is an upgrade you can actually skip. At most, I would say 2 upgrades. The reason being, you shouldn't have to need to buy camp skills. Hopefully, when you're recruiting people, you're hitting good camp skills, or at least something that's usable. You just need 1 usable camp skill on each hero, and then you can build your teams properly from there. The only one I would say is required is some kind of nighttime ambush preventer. So as long as you have some way to cover that, you can usually find some way to spend the rest of your points, and it's still efficient. Even if it's just pep talk or encourage and stuff like that. Those are both good skills, and everyone has access to them for the most part. So yeah, Survivalist is another one that could actually be skipped entirely. So the Blacksmith and the Guild Hall are the most important to the run, so we're going to talk about these now. The Blacksmith, obviously try and get everything upgraded, or at least as much as you can afford. The Furnace, you probably don't need to take past 3 upgrades if you don't have the resources to support it, but otherwise you do need weaponsmithing and armorsmithing maxed out. For the Blacksmith, I prioritize armor over weapons. The reason being, the extra few hit points and the dodge that you get from the Blacksmith armor upgrades are very relevant. People will say that dodge is the worst defense, and there's a case to be made, right? I'm not here to debate which is the best defense, but I will say the reason to consider armorsmithing first is because in terms of the accuracy of enemies, it scales the weakest between apprentice and veteran. I think on average, enemies have like a 81% chance to hit in apprentice dungeons, and then it only goes up to like 87, 88 for veteran before skyrocketing into like 102, 107 in champion. So that means that armorsmithing is going to keep you alive very reliably in the early game. So it's only in champion when the dodge falls off, but then the hit points are still relevant. So I would focus on armor before weapons, and then I would focus on weapons when you get speed breakpoints. So usually speed breakpoints I think are at 3rd rank and 5th for a lot of heroes, which means that upgrading your weapon to 2 and 4 usually is not as impactful. It's still important, don't get me wrong. You will notice having more damage and crit and stuff on your characters. So I'm not saying to skip weaponsmithing, but I'm saying if you're wondering which one to focus on first, I would say armor. And then once you get your armor up and you can afford to get people to weapons safely, right? You can upgrade your weapons safely. Like you have the money to do it. You know, you have like 20,000 gold or something like that and you just don't care. Then sure, then do weapons. Otherwise, I think the priority order should be armor and then skills and then weapons. So this is the Blacksmith. Let's talk about the Guild Hall. What makes the Guild Hall very important is the fact that it gives accuracy to your attacks. So accuracy is the best damage stat. If you can't hit anything, you do 0 damage. So being able to reliably hit stuff is awesome. Also, if your abilities have secondary effects like bleed or stun or debuff or move, for instance, then upgrading your skills gives them higher chances to stick. So there's a lot that is encapsulated, if I can use that word, in upgrading your skills. In case of your healers, such as the Vestal and the Occultist, it also changes the ranges of their heals and makes them better. Obviously, Occultist is a weird case because he can always roll 0. But in terms of Vestal specifically, who we're going to talk about here in a second, Vestal really needs those skill upgrades on her heals. The group heal at low rank is 1 to 3 in terms of healing, and that is completely garbage. Once you upgrade it and it gets to 2 to 3 and then 4 to 5, those are both really good. So it makes Vestal a much more effective healer, but just starting out, her starting heal is very bad. So we always want to make sure that our skills and our guild hall are up to our current level of heroes. You always want to make sure you can have skills either at the level of the hero or like one level behind, depending on what your gold count's looking like. So definitely do not skip the guild hall. I would say it is easily the most impactful set of upgrades for the entire game. One other point I forgot to mention about the guild hall is since we are skipping upgrading the tavern, that means we have all the portraits to funnel into the guild hall, so we don't have to worry about sharing. Districts are kind of difficult in terms of choosing which ones to get because this is really a playstyle preference. So my suggestion would be the bank and the cartographer's camp. I think these give you the most universal benefit. The bank saves you a lot of money over a run, and then at a certain point it starts generating a lot of money for you. But I was also trying to math out some time ago, like I kind of gave up on it, but I was trying to math out if the bank was actually worth it, because sometimes it may not be. I don't know. If you never get enough money saved up to where the bank becomes relevant, like if you're always under 30,000 gold, the bank may just not be worth it. So if you feel the bank doesn't work for you, don't get it, but I still think the bank is good if you are really good with your money, and all you need is a couple good missions with Antiquarian, and then the bank becomes a huge factor, so I still think it's worth getting. The Cartographer's Camp, I'm assuming that when you're playing Bloodmoon, you are trying to play in High Torch just to minimize your risk, and the Cartographer's Camp gives you a lot of good bonuses for the safest mode of play, so it's just a net benefit and worth getting. As for the other districts, it really comes down to preference. You're not going to be able to get more than 1 or 2 if you get the 2 that I talked about, unless you're really aggressively hunting heirlooms, then maybe 3, but I would say plan around getting 2. So if you plan around getting 2, you have to decide which 2 you want the most. This comes down to what heroes you like using. I think the training ring is really good. That's why I got it on this file, because I think Man-at-Arms and Shieldbreaker and Houndmaster are all pretty good to help you complete Bloodmoon, and it's a very good set of upgrades. Otherwise, if you like your rogues, Yellow Hand is good. If you're worried about Crimson Court, the Vintners is good. Altar of Light, if you need more healing output, is good. So all of these choices are good. I keep using that word. So it really comes down to which heroes you like the most and what you want to get out of them. Alright, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Be on the lookout for part 2, which is going to cover your roster and how to build it, what to look for in order to maximize your chances of beating Bloodmoon. And then after that, we're going to move into how to tackle the regions, some general strategies, including some tips for handling the end of the game. So thank you very much for watching. Join Discord if you haven't, and then go check out the other couple videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.